Alright, before the video actually starts, I'm recording this after I finished editing it. I have crappy news, but my laptop's RAM or something is screwy, so as a result, the large video files I use to capture the chapters for this game are just totally screwed up. The video's choppy. The audio's fine, so at least it's, understandable, but yeah, sorry about that, guys. Real bummer. Hey everyone, I'm Alex, and welcome back to the final video of our series ranking the chapters of the PaperMario games based on quality. This is my personal favorite Paper Mario game, and a large part of that is due to the fact that I like every chapter in this game a fair deal. As a result, it was pretty tough for me to choose a definite order for this ranking. I still got my reasons though. Let's get into them. While it got the bottom slot, Chapter 1 is by no means bad. If you want an idea of just how much this playthrough changed my opinions, this was originally in 5th place. This drop isn't because Chapter 1 was way worse than I remembered or anything. On the contrary, I just liked its competition more. It starts off the same as most Chapter 1s tend to, but after its first level it becomes a more desert-themed area. The only level that I would say stands out to me in particular is the last one though. The first 3 are classic platforming fare, the only things really worth noting being 1-2 having a bit of dialogue and 1-3 having the first boss fight with the chunks, with this ironically being the hardest one since you don't have Bowser and Thudley at this point. He's still a pushover, with his fanciest attack doing a paltry 1 damage despite all the taunting he does afterwards. 1-4 is a neat ruins area, with quite a few creative rooms like the rolling thwomp one. The boss fight is sort of a pain if you fall off of him, but fortunately I stuck all my jumps and put him down with relative ease. Fractail is a pretty unique boss, even if he's not too challenging either. Chapter 1 has no big glaring flaws because it takes no real risks. This isn't a terrible crime though, so I'll still take this over the Boggly Tree any day. This is probably the weirdest chapter structurally in the entire series. It marks the beginning of the endgame, which is mainly enforced through story beats. From here out, the structure isn't just go to place, get the pure heart, and get out. The story takes center stage here. The levels are pretty dull, you just fight through a bunch of similar looking guys until you reach the end of the gauntlet. It's got some of the most amusing conversations in the game, but still manages to drag out despite that. It's a lot like Chapter 3 from Thousand Year Door being a combat-centric chapter. But unlike Chapter 3 in Thousand Year Door, this is missing a few elements. There is no substance at all besides the fights, and the end, a big story point. The only reason this isn't last like I originally had it is because of its creativity and how much I like the design. I remember being super shocked when Count Bleck himself made an appearance just to taunt you near the end of 6-1, and even more shocked when the world actually ended in 6-2. 6-3 is just haunting. It's this incredibly desolate, barren, white wasteland with nothing but occasional rubble in your path. Even the pure heart got messed up. I do love the fight with Mr. L here. He's one of the most amusing characters in the game already, and the Brobot only adds to that. That thing looks scuffed as hell in 3D. The ending is also cool, since you get to see Dimentio begin working towards his plan's endgame. This is higher than Chapter 1 mainly because it's got so much interesting stuff going on plot-wise to ignore entirely, but as is our mantra here at Cytonox, gameplay is king. An element this chapter is sorely lacking. Chapter 2 is one I feel fairly confident in my placement of here in the middle. As a kid I hated it since I had to do 2-3 the old-fashioned way with no internet access to just Google the vault code like any sensible person would do now. Instead, I spent hours trying to figure out how to tape my Wii Remote's D-pad down to do the gerbil wheel thing while I did other stuff around the house. This problem is pretty much completely mitigated now, so I have much less complaints than I did at the time. For starters, the environment is pretty unique. It's all in a mansion off in a bog, which is a weird but neat concept. The bog level in general has a lot of design choices that stood out to me as really creative and off the beaten path. For example, there are a ton of wind turbines in the background. I have zero idea why, but it's something out of the ordinary, so I guess I dig them. Maybe Merlee is really into green energy. She seems like that kind of person. 2-2 is a fun gauntlet of, oddly enough, mostly optional traps. I guess if you haven't played the game before and don't know where to go, the design makes a lot more sense. Lastly, I think 2-4 being a maze was a cool idea, but admittedly it becomes more annoying if you get lost. I also like the little game show thing at the end where you gotta figure out which Merlee is the real one, although you'd have to be a friggin' moron to mess it up. You can even see a fly on the real Merlee who is hiding in the toilet, which is a dead giveaway, questions or not. I personally like Mimi, so I didn't mind her featuring heavily in this chapter. One cool detail I noticed is in every chapter she has a different outfit, which isn't something you see characters do a lot in games. It never explains what the deal is with the gears in her head in 3D when she's in spider form too, which is interesting. I guess she's an android or something? Definitely more mysterious without an explanation, so I'm fine with that. The mansion levels sort of blend together in a way, so the aesthetic gets a bit repetitive near the home stretch. I will give 2-3 props for being one of the most memorable levels in the game to me though, so it has that going. This chapter is a lot like how Chapter 4 is for me in The Thousand Year Door. I love the design so much that I don't really like talking badly about it, but it's undeniably sort of a pain to play through. That comparison is sort of deceitful though, since even the most frustrating part of this chapter pales in comparison to Twilight Trail. 7-2 is pretty much just jumping up and answering quizzes, which can be amusing but gets old fast. Also, the fact that a character warps you down to the lower levels for a side quest with a nigh pointless reward is downright f***ed up. I would rather pull my own teeth out with a bottle opener than jump up that second dark room again. 7-3 is another level a lot of people tend to hate on, and I'm no exception. However, I did mellow out on it with time. It's a lot less difficult to navigate than I thought, and as long as you know what apples you need ahead of time, you won't need to do much notable backtracking. 7-4 is fine, nothing too interesting there. Although I do like Bone Chill. He's an insanely easy boss who Luigi can absolutely slaughter with high jumps, but bosses in this game are jokes anyways, so it's not worth harping on him for that. I used to try to talk like him when I was little since I thought it was cool how fancy he talked despite being a big ice monster skeleton guy. Come to think of it, this game had a pretty big impact on me, I guess. I used to also say salutations in Chiao like Dementio did, even though I didn't know how to pronounce Chiao. I still don't for the record if you couldn't tell, I'm just guessing and can't be bothered to find out if this is right or not. Anyways, back to Chapter 7. 7-1 is the best part of it by far, or more specifically, the visit you make to the underworld between Chapters 6 and 7 when Mario was literally sent to hell. Or I guess more accurately, the underworld, since it definitely has a more Greek theme to it with Queen Jades and the River Twigs and a bunch of other names alluding to Greek mythology. Although those pink guys with shades are called D-men, so I guess it's just a mix of cultures and versions of hell or something. I like the music in this level too, and the River Twigs theme is pretty unnerving. Overall, a chapter that's too cool for me to dislike, but not without its irritating moments. This is a chapter I think most people dislike. I did for a while too. I mean, the space levels are samey and easy to get lost in, nothing too distinct happens in either one, Squirps is pretty annoying and unfunny, and 4-2 is sort of a pain. So why did I put it this high? Pretty much just two reasons. One, I like the gameplay of the space levels. It's kind of like those old Neo Geo shooter arcade games, and I think those are pretty fun. I especially like how they used it for the fight against Mr. L and Brobot at the end. It's the most fun boss in the game, I'd say. The second reason is that I really like 4-4. It's got the best puzzles in the game, and it's a maze done right. It's like a better version of 2-4 in that way. It's just a really creative area with all the gravity switching, hidden doors, and so on. Enough to offset the annoyance of 2-2. So yeah, when I gave it a second chance, this one was actually pretty fun. This is probably my most contentious pick. A lot of people seem to hate this chapter, about as much as 4. And this time around, I'm not really sure why. I think the environment is pretty cool, which is basically like the caveman era. As a kid, I actually thought it was meant to be Africa because it looked like a savanna to me, and as far as I knew, that was just what all of Africa looked like. 5-3 is the weakest link in my opinion, but it's more just uninteresting to me than anything else. I think the other levels are fine. 5-1 has that ridiculous block puzzle that basically everyone just looks up online, I assume, but it's still pretty iconic either way. 5-2 is one of my favorite levels since it's about as non-linear as this game ever gets, and you get Cudge, my favorite pixel. You can also have Cudge yell, "whatever you want," which can be pretty hilarious to see in a Mario game. This time around, I was feeling a bit more wholesome than usual and just told all the Cragnons to sub to our channel. 5-3 and 5-4 are sort of similar since they're both in the caves and have a bit of Flint Cragley stuff going on, who's basically a mix of Colorado from 64 and Bear Grylls. He's an egotistical blowhard who blames everything on his crew, which is something the series has done before with the Shadow Sirens, so it's not exactly a new gag, but it works well enough, I think. The processing plant area in 5-4 is neat, and it's a nice contrast to the natural caves with all the steel walls and mind-controlled guys walking around. Then the bosses. 2 fights with O'Chunks are in this chapter, and both are pretty easy. The ground pound hitboxes are pretty wonky, but they work in your favor, so I'm not complaining. King Crocus is a pretty memorable boss, I'd say. One of the handful of bosses with multiple phases, and his are pretty distinct. That said, I think the devs expected you to fight the second phase the slow way with Peach, since I doubt they meant for me to kill him as fast as I did with Bowser. As an aside, I love the weird faces on his little trapezoid dudes, real funny looking. I also like his boss theme, it's sorta creepy to me for some reason. I found Chapter 5 to be pretty memorable and fun, so it gets to carry on the Chapter 5 tradition of being in the middle area of my ranking. Chapter 8 stands out for a number of reasons, but a big one for me personally is just that I find it hard. In an otherwise pretty easy game, this chapter stands out to me for kicking my ass over and over. My recording for this chapter is like double the length of the others, simply because I died like 20 times in 8-3. Even if you come packed with healing items, enemies do merciless amounts of damage and are all over the place. It can be frustrating, sure, but I thought it made for a neat final challenge. I also really like the look of the chapter, which is pretty much entirely black and white. Pretty fitting look for a big void castle, which itself is a cool idea. A castle in a giant universe-erasing black hole is awesome. The music is fitting, I'd say, too. Plenty of good puzzles and maze-like rooms, which are also neat. Although I admit I suck at the last maze room in 8-4. I also like how each party member gets their own boss fight before getting booted off the team thanks to a trap or something. Added some real tension to the standard routine. The Mimi fight in 8-2 obliterated me since I couldn't land my jumps right and kept hitting the side of her head, which was sort of frustrating due to the game's weird jumping physics, but fair enough, I guess. Then there's the final bosses. I think they're both pretty good fights, but it'd benefit a lot from a larger health pool, since both Bleck and Super Dementio get slaughtered by the classic boss-killing strategy. The story also gets to shine here, which is widely regarded to be the best of the Paper Mario games due to its less conventional nature. Bleck's sacrifice at the end is still a nice, satisfying conclusion to the events of the game. However, I do take slight issue with his rationale for, ending the entire universe. Ending it just because he can't date Timpini or whatever seems a bit extreme to be believable, although the Dark Prognosticus is said to corrupt people, so maybe it's just that. I think it would have been more interesting if Bleck felt wronged by the entire world somehow, and was more motivated by revenge than misery. Maybe a bit more cliché, but they could have still kept plot elements from the final product in as well, just altered somewhat. The game still has an impressive amount of background story that you won't stumble upon unless you look for it though, like stuff you hear from the bartender about the Count's minions. Overall, pretty great. Here we have it, the uncontested top dog of Super Paper Mario. This is pretty much accepted as the objective best chapter, so I'm sure this shocked basically no one. The unique pixelated art style makes it stand out already, but it's also home to some of the most fun levels in the game, including mine and most people's favorite, Fort Francis or 3-4. I also like 3-3 too. Seriously, this chapter in general has catchy music, the first fight with Dementio, and in my opinion, the best humor of the series to date. It's just stacked with good stuff. The weakest link, 3-2, is redeemed by giving you Thudley and having what I feel are pretty agreeable swimming controls. So even that isn't too big of a blight on the quality. 3-3 has hands down the best platforming in the game, and even though it can be frustrating falling down, I'm usually a fan of vertical platforming and this wasn't an exception. I really like all the references to past games in Fort Francis too, not just in the tower rooms but also conversations. Like Francis talking about a show he watches called Grotus Chronicles, which seems to imply that the X-Nauts just star in sci-fi TV shows now or something, which I think is kind of funny. He also has a long list of questions you need to answer to progress in certain parts, poking fun at people like Francis, some of which even applied to me, which was a terrifying realization. Not just one either, it was like a handful of them. The dating sim thing he does with Peach is hilarious too. Rather than answering angrily, I found it funnier to humor him somewhat just to see how he replies. The boss fight with him is sort of annoying since he fights really defensively and it can drag out a little, but frankly it's just nice that there's a boss who doesn't die in under 10 seconds in this game, so I won't harp on him too much. Thinking about it, Chapter 3s are always good in this series. They probably have the best overall rep throughout if this chart I made is anything to go off of. Well, that's that. Our series on the Paper Mario games is done. Be sure to tune in for the conclusion to the Arkham boss rankings next week, as well as like and subscribe. That's all for now, guys. Deuces.